Hello Orchid friends, how are you? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time watching my video, my channel is all about orchids. From what orchids I have, how I grow them, my thoughts on certain orchid topics, to what orchids in my collection are blooming, etc. So if you want to follow along my orchid hobby adventure, please consider subscribing to my channel and turn on the notification. Today in this video, we're going to look at one of my Dendrobium orchids. It's a species, and the name is on the screen here. I'm not gonna say it because I know I'm gonna get it wrong, so here you go. That's the name. This is a species, and it's a miniature Dendrobium orchid, and it has a fragrance, and I will tell you a little bit more about its fragrance later in the video. Let's start with this video clip from early 2019. At the time, this orchid had 3 flowers in bloom already, but at the end of 2018, it actually had opened its first bloom and had finished that bloom since. And in this clip, you see that there were still 2 buds to open. This orchid is a miniature and it is still grown in bark chips. And the reason I put it in this plastic cup is because I want to try to conserve as much moisture as possible, because in my environment with the heat on, it's very easy for this kind of orchid with thin roots and in bark chip media to run out of moisture and run out of any moisture in the media. So I had to do something, so I decided to use this method. But also because this orchid is somewhat new to my collection. It's been maybe 8 months, that I want to make sure that it's being separated from the rest of my collection, even though they're still sort of in that general area, but just in different on the different level of my growing rack. And having this cup also kind of helps with preventing certain kinds of bugs or whatever that may spread to other orchid, right? If I have a cup, it kind of provides the additional barrier. And toward the end of January 2019, the rest of the buds opened up, and I was pretty happy because this orchid is a miniature. It's very cute, and I also was very in love with the flower size. It's so tiny. It's only about the size of my pinky. Tiny flowers, but it's white, but then the lip has a little bit of greenish yellow or yellowish green to it. And when the flower is completely mature, all the petals would actually tilt up. So that is pretty interesting, as if it's like a little tiny bird trying to fly somewhere. And it does have a fragrance, and the fragrance is not very strong, but if I put my nose close to it, the fragrance reminds me of apple sour. I don't know if you know the kind of candy or gummy bear candy that has the apple sour flavor. That's exactly the smell that this orchid was giving out as fragrance. And let's now talk a little bit about the care that I have given this orchid, because this Dendrobium is not the type of Dendrobium that requires winter rest, which is another kind of Dendrobium out there that many people have. So since it doesn't require winter rest, so my care for it is essentially the same type of care that I provide with my Phalaenopsis orchid, which I have many of. I use quarter strength fertilizer every time I use fertilizer. But in winter time, for this particular orchid, I still provide water every 7 to 10 days. I didn't go up to 2 weeks for this orchid because it has thin roots, and it's also because it's in a very tiny container with bark chip media. So about every 7 to 10 days, I would at least give it some water. And if it's when I am giving it fertilizer, then it's quarter strength that I use. This orchid is also receiving a lot of sunlight, and I usually have it on the very top rack on my growing shelf, and that receives the most sunlight, and it's also on the very front. Dendrobium does like a lot of sunlight, so this is the kind of general care that I give it. And for those of you who are new to the orchid hobby, there is another type of dendrobium that requires winter rest. And what that means is that, as they drop leaves, they're not going to need that much water during the winter time. And because in their natural habitat, they usually grow on cliffs or in on top of a mountain, or essentially they require a lot of drainage, and during winter time in their natural habitat, that area also usually is drier, so they don't really need that much water. And what happened is, for example, with Dendrobium nobile type orchids, if you water them too often, too much in winter time, it's very easy that they're just gonna grow cakey, orchid babies instead of flowers for you in the coming spring. So that's something to pay attention to. But luckily, this particular orchid doesn't require winter rest, so my care for it is just the same thing as my many other orchids. And you may have noticed that I use a wire to clip onto the container, because that way it's easier for me to take this orchid out of the plastic cup. But then also, right after I soak this orchid during the watering session, if I decide that it's too wet, I can simply hang it up for a day or two, and then I put it back into this transparent cup. So that wire just gives me more flexibility in terms of accessing, taking out the orchid, but also allowing me to have it hang this orchid up somewhere on my grow space, on my growing rack. Also, another thing that I want to mention here, and this is something that I share in my Chinese version of this video, is that in the beginning of this video, where I share my the name of this orchid, and the beginning of this orchid's name is in small case, in lowercase, and that usually is a signal to tell you that this particular orchid is a species. If the orchid name has a capital letter, then that usually is a name that we give to a hybrid, whether it's a primary hybrid or a complex hybrid. See, this is something that I didn't know as a new orchid hobbyist, and as I learn more and more about orchid parentage and orchid knowledge, then I realized that there is that difference. It's not really that important, but it is important if you can tell the difference and research on orchid's background and parentage in order to learn how to better care for the kind of orchid that you have. But it's not super essential if it's not, if it's not important to you, then it's just some information for you as a reference. Because I know there are some people who are really specific about orchid names, and some people, like myself, I really don't care as much. But I just wanted to share this with you in case you're new to this hobby, so you kind of know the difference between orchids with capital names or lowercase names. But quickly back to this orchid before we close this video is that it also is currently growing a new growth. It's giving me a new growth at the very base. So in the near future, when it has more development, I will make sure I make an update to share with you the progress of this orchid. This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!